In a recent video, we examined the scourge of fake history in the context of academic John Esposito's claim that 5 centuries of peaceful coexistence elapsed before political events and an imperial papal power play, it's like a tongue twister, led to centuries-long series of so-called holy wars that pitted Christendom against Islam and left an enduring legacy of misunderstanding and distrust. We also saw that that claim is pure bunk. Those 5 centuries of peaceful coexistence featured Muslims conquering 3/4 of the Christian world. All of the Middle East, Greater Syria, and all the nations that it encompassed at the time, all of North Africa from Egypt to Morocco, all of Spain, or nearly all of Spain, except for the northwest quadrant where the Reconquista began. That'll be another video eventually. And into France, until it was finally stopped at 1 century after Muhammad's death in 732 at the Battle of Tours. We also saw that all those conquests featured the usual atrocities. Thousands of Christians were killed, put to the sword. Many more were enslaved. Churches were burned, turned into mosques, and so forth. And we also saw that, at least according to the Islamic historiographical tradition, that was done, all those attacks and conquests and slaughters and destruction of churches, in accordance with Islamic teaching. Esposito's reason for lying was clear. He wants to portray that whatever bad blood exists between Muslims and Christians is squarely the latter's fault, the Christians' fault. Therefore, everything before the First Crusades, which featured Christians going into Muslim territory at the time, is presented as peaceful coexistence. Until, of course, the imperial papal power play led to the holy wars and misunderstanding and distrust from Muslims against Christians, etc. Now let's look at another lie emanating from another authority, a so-called historian of religions, and I speak, of course, of Karen Armstrong. Among other honors and accolades that she has received, she's the best-selling author of many books, including A History of God, Holy War, Islam, and the Battle for God. So she too must know her Islam, yes? In a 2007 article that she wrote, in which I actually responded to way back then, in an NRO article, link in description if you're interested, she made the following assertion. Once again, pay attention especially to the opening part of this excerpt. Ever since the Crusades, people in the West have seen the Prophet Muhammad as a sinister figure. The scholar monks of Europe stigmatized Muhammad as a cruel warlord who established the false religion of Islam by the sword. They also, with ill-concealed envy, berated him as a lecher and sexual pervert at a time when the popes were attempting to impose celibacy on the reluctant clergy. In other words, she's saying that negative images of Muhammad began in Europe just before and as a pretext for the First Crusade. In reality, of course, non-Muslims, Christians chief among them, because they were the ones who were conquered and lived under Islam, saw Muhammad as a sinister figure and a sexual pervert right from the start. Her words, not mine. So let's do a quick review. According to the oldest parchment that alludes to a warlike prophet, which was written in 634, this is just a mere 2 years after Muhammad's death in 632, it has a man asking a learned Jewish scribe what he knows about, quote, the prophet who has appeared among the Saracens, unquote. The elderly man, with much groaning, responded, he is deceiving. For do prophets come with swords and chariot? Verily, these events of today are works of confusion. You will discover nothing true from the said prophet except human bloodshed. Muhammad is also mentioned in a few fragments, a Syriac fragment written in 634 as well. And it's not very legible, but you can, scholars and linguists have discerned that it mentions the, quote, followers of Muhammad as killing and slaughtering and enslaving thousands of people in Galilee and Bethlehem, and up to 10,000 in the vicinity of Damascus. Writing in 640, Thomas the Presbyter writes, quote, there was a battle, which was probably Ajnadain in 634, between the Muslims and the Arabs of Muhammad in Palestine, 12 miles east of Gaza. The Romans fled. Some 4,000 poor villagers of Palestine, Christians, were killed there. The Arabs of Muhammad ravaged the whole region and even climbed the mountain of Mardin and killed many monks there in the monasteries of Kedar and Benata. Also in the 640s, a Coptic homily is apparently the earliest account to associate the Saracen invaders with an albeit hypocritical piety. It counsels Christians to fast, but, quote, not like the Saracens, who are oppressors, who give themselves up to prostitution, massacre, and lead into captivity the sons of men, saying, we both fast and pray. Writing around 650, John of Nico, an Egyptian, said that the Ishmaelite invaders and conquerors of Egypt, which was conquered in 640, so he's an eyewitness, were not just, quote, enemies of God, but adherents of the detestable doctrine of that beast, Muhammad, end quote. By the way, all of these preceding quotes, if you're interested and want to source them yourself, are from this book, Seeing Islam as Others Saw It, a survey and evaluation of Christian, Jewish, and Zoroastrian writings on early Islam by Robert Hoyland. Now, aside from those scattered, fragmented sentences, which again portray Muhammad and his followers in negative terms, it's really only towards the end of the 7th and early 8th centuries that the Christians, mostly Semitic, Christians of Semitic origins in Syria and Egypt, started to really scrutinize and have access to the Quran and other Islamic scriptures. And the result is that the image of Muhammad went from bad to worse. The best representative of this is St. John of Damascus, who was born around 676, which is a long time before the First Crusade in 1095. Based on his analysis of the Quran and other Islamic scriptures that he was able to access, he lived in Damascus, he's a Semitic person, he reads Arabic, he concluded that the only miracle that Muhammad performed was to invade, slaughter, and enslave those who refused to submit to him, which he called, quote, a miracle that even common robbers and highway bandits perform, unquote. He also said that the prophet put whatever words best served his purpose in God's mouth, thus, quote, simulating revelation in order to justify his own sexual indulgence, unquote. He made his religion appealing and justified his own behavior by easing the sexual mores of the Arabs, infusing the notion of obedience to God with war to aggrandize oneself with booty and slaves. Right after John of Damascus, many others followed suit. In the 8th century, Nicetas Byzantinos, who also had a copy of the Quran, presented it as, quote, the most pitiful and most inept little book of the Arab Muhammad, full of blasphemies against the Most High, with all its ugly and vulgar filth, particularly its claim that heaven amounted to a sexual brothel. In his entry for the years 629-630, Theophanes the Confessor, an Eastern Roman chronicler, or Byzantine as they call it, born in 758, wrote, and this is a good quote, pay attention. He, Muhammad, taught his subjects that he who kills an enemy or is killed by an enemy goes to paradise. And he said that this paradise was one of carnal eating and drinking and intercourse with women, and had a river of wine, honey, and milk, and that the women were not like the ones down here, but different ones, and that the intercourse was long-lasting and the pleasure continuous, and other things full of profligacy and stupidity. Now notice, this is actually all direct from Islamic teaching and doctrine and the Quran. He mentions how Muhammad taught people that he who kills the enemy and kills himself enters paradise. Well, yeah, check out Quran 9:111. That's exactly what it says. He who slays and is slayed for Allah gains paradise. As for the women that he's discussing and how paradise is essentially a brothel, well, he's referring to the Ain Hor, or the Huris, who in Islamic teaching are essentially supernatural, celestial women created for the express purpose of gratifying Allah's favorites in perpetuity, the suicide bombers, essentially. Perhaps most importantly for Christians, Muhammad's denial of and war on all things distinctly Christian, the sonship of Jesus Christ, the Trinity, the resurrection, even the cross, proved that Muhammad was Satan's minion. Thus, the false prophet, the hypocrite, the liar, the adulterer, the forerunner of Antichrist, and the beast were mainstream epithets for Muhammad amongst Christians for about 4 centuries before the First Crusade. In short, it wasn't only right before and as a pretext for the First Crusade that Christians began to falsely demonize Muhammad as a lecher and sexual pervert and a cruel warlord, her words, Karen Armstrong's, not mine. That is exactly how they saw him right from the get-go. Incidentally, Armstrong's claim that the scholar monks of Europe, quote, with ill-concealed envy, berated him, Muhammad, as a lecher and sexual pervert, at a time when the popes were attempting to impose celibacy on the reluctant clergy, unquote, seems to be a bit of projection on Armstrong's part. Remember, she's an ex-nun who essentially betrayed her vows. So perhaps it's her who is with, quote, ill-concealed envy, unquote, who's taking it out on her former colleagues who stayed the course. Be that as it may, let us close by considering the lies of Karen Armstrong in comparison to John Esposito's. Although Muslims engaged in violence and conquest for 5 centuries before the First Crusade, John Esposito would have us believe that Christians and Muslims lived in peaceful coexistence for those 5 centuries. And although Christians have always seen Muhammad as a sinister figure, Armstrong claims that this view was fabricated right before and as a pretext for the First Crusade. In both cases, everything is once again those evil crusaders' fault.